You can help us reach more people with our content by subscribing and interacting with our videos. In the spring of 1944, a Jewish psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was arrested by the Nazis and deported to Auschwitz. Before that moment, his life had shape. A career, a manuscript he had spent years writing, a wife he loved, and a home. All of it was gone within days, but what Frankl later described as the most disorienting part wasn't the physical suffering. It was the total collapse of his framework, the sense that every structure that had once told him who he was, how the world worked, and what anything meant had been violently dissolved overnight. He was standing in the middle of a reality he didn't have words for, surrounded by people who felt the same way, with no clear map and no guarantee that one was coming. Most of us will never face anything close to what he faced. But that feeling, that particular disorientation of watching the world you understood stop making sense, is something many of us recognize right now, in our own way, at our own scale. We are living in a season of confusion, the kind of confusion that rattles your bearings, unsettles your relationships, shakes your faith, and leaves you genuinely unsure of what to hold on to. If you felt this, you are not alone. But you do need to understand what is happening to you, because misreading confusion can do real damage. Confusion understood, though, can become something else entirely. To understand it, we need to go back, way back. In the book of Genesis, there is a story that most people remember as a cautionary tale, but rarely take the time to sit inside. The entire human race, one people, one language, one shared way of understanding the world, decided to build a tower at a place called Babel. And it wasn't just architecture. It was a declaration that said, "We will not be scattered. We will not be confused. We will build something so permanent and so tall that nothing will ever unsettle us again." Then God looked down and, in one of Scripture's most surprising moves, introduced confusion. He scrambled their language overnight. Neighbors began to sound like strangers, the tower stopped, and the people scattered. Generations of readers have treated that as a punishment. But there is another way to read it. What if the confusion wasn't the judgment? What if the unity they were so desperate to preserve was actually the problem? A false certainty and a collective grip on control so tight it was slowly strangling them? What if God scattered them not to hurt them, but because the tower was never going to take them where they needed to go? That reframe matters a great deal for where we are right now. In 410 AD, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. For the people living through it, this was not just a political event, it was the collapse of the world as they knew it. Rome was not merely a city, it was the organizing idea of civilization. When it fell, people didn't just lose a government, they lost their framework for reality. But in the midst of that confusion and loss was a man by the name of Augustine of Hippo. He was a brilliant, restless North African bishop who had himself lived through years of personal confusion before his famous conversion. He understood from the inside what it felt like for the ground to give way. Rather than joining the chorus of despair, he sat down and wrote The City of God, one of the most enduring books in Western history. His central argument was both simple and radical. Rome was never the real city. It was always a shadow of something more permanent. The confusion, he said, was an invitation to stop putting your weight on the wrong thing. He wasn't dismissing the pain. He was refusing to let the pain be the final word. Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Danish thinker who spent much of his life misunderstood and socially isolated, wrote that before any real leap of faith or genuine transformation, there must first be a moment of profound disorientation, real vertigo. He believed that most people, when they hit that feeling, immediately run back toward anything familiar. Even if familiar means smaller, even if familiar means less true. But those who stay in the disorientation without panicking and without numbing it, he argued, often find themselves somewhere entirely new on the other side. The confusion, in other words, isn't the opposite of clarity. It's often the doorway to it. Richard Rohr calls this the liminal space, from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. It's the in-between, not where you were, not yet where you're going. And Rohr makes a point saying that almost all genuine spiritual growth happens not in the comfortable center of life, but on this threshold. Not when everything makes sense, but when it doesn't. Now consider Viktor Frankl. What he encountered there was not just suffering. It was a total erasure of every external structure that had once told him who he was and how the world worked. And yet, in those camps, he made an observation that would shape the rest of his life. The prisoners who survived, not just physically but inwardly, were not the ones who had the easiest circumstances. They were the ones who found meaning inside the circumstances. He watched men in the bleakest conditions share their last piece of bread, hold on to love, and choose dignity when dignity had been deliberately stripped from them. Frankl concluded that the one freedom no one can take from you is the freedom to decide how you will respond to what is happening, not to pretend it isn't happening, not to explain it away, to look it in the face and choose. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The Israelites understood this too, slowly and painfully. They had witnessed the most dramatic string of miracles in the entire Torah. Plagues, a parted sea, manna falling from the sky. And still, when the desert stretched out before them with no clear destination in sight, they panicked. They grumbled. They built a golden calf to worship. They begged Moses to let them go back to Egypt, back to slavery, because at least in slavery they knew what to expect. Confusion, it turns out, can make chains feel safer than open sky. But the 40 years in the wilderness were not a detour. The rabbinical tradition has long held that God wasn't leading them through the confusion to get to the destination. The wilderness was the curriculum. They were learning to stop depending on Egypt and start trusting something deeper. So here we are. What do? Well, we learn to resist both temptations that confusion tends to produce. The first temptation is to get loud, to grab the nearest available certainty, sharpen it into a weapon, and use it to make the shaking stop. The second is to go quiet, to disengage, to scroll, to numb, to tell ourselves that nothing is knowable and therefore nothing matters. Both are understandable. Neither is honest, and neither actually helps. What helps is staying in the room, asking better questions instead of louder ones, holding our certainties loosely enough to still be teachable, while holding our convictions deeply enough to still be anchored. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 14:33 that God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. This verse doesn't promise that God will never lead you through confusion. It promises that confusion is not the destination. It is the road. And if you are on the road, even a disorienting one, you're still moving. Every person I mentioned today passed through a season where nothing made sense. Frankl, Augustine, Moses, Kierkegaard. They didn't have it figured out. They just didn't stop walking. The ground might be shaking, but a shaking ground is not the same as no ground. You may just need to look down more carefully and more honestly to see what it is. Yes, we are living in a season of confusion. But God doesn't want you to run back to Egypt. He wants you to run to Him. Because the wilderness has never been the end of the story. Thank you for being here. See you next time.